instead of either you can do a documentary or you do, in my opinion, or a narrative. And the fact that we never hear us speak the different languages, we're mute, and this MTV staccato video technique that's dealing with the subject matter like slavery, for me, just aesthetically, I just understand that, how you use this MTV music video technique dealing with slavery, and that's just, for me, I think that got me. I'm not talking about the subject matter. I'm just talking about
it's a technical standpoint.
What?
As in a technical standpoint.
Let me just explain just briefly. This film, unlike Boycott, which I'm happy to defend, because that was something that was very much my baby and the director's baby, and we developed from scratch. But this was a movie that was made and written by this very famous African, Haitian African man named Patrick Chamoiseau, and directed by a French Haitian man named Guy Delorier. And they are true to where they come from. They have a different sensibility. Haiti is a different place. They are French-speaking black people there. And this film, the basic conceit of the film, is that because we were all rendered without identities, without voices, we were not considered to be people, that in their conceit, their choice for the stylistic approach of the film, nobody had a voice because the power structure didn't give us one. And that was an artistic choice that they made. The movie was bought by HBO for Black History Month because it was considered to be very, just very different and very unusual and poetic. And I then turned it into English. So we hired Walter Mosley and we hired Jaimin Hunsu, and we went to work with the filmmaker. And as Spike can attest to, filmmakers make choices. And when you have a director who feels passionate about cello music or other things that you may not entirely agree with, you have good artistic discussion, but ultimately you support your director's vision, and that was his vision, and this is the movie he wanted. And believe me, I invite criticism and discussion, and I think that hopefully someone else will make another one of these movies from a more African-American point of view, or any point of view, because I don't think there should be one movie on any one of our topics. I think there should be hundreds of them, as there are with everybody else's. So.
Thank you. For a lot of us who are viewing
the cultural planet. And one thing that the film does is stimulate us to look at our history. Look at the economic changes that went on. Look at the demographic changes in the Americas that went on. Look at the cultural changes, whether it be linguistic, whether it be culinary, how we eat, whether it be the way we greet and talk to each other. Those are African-based in the Americas. And that's if the film can inspire us to look historically and to analyze our histories and our contributions, it's a wonderful start.
I want to direct this to Gabrielle. One of the things that we can't ignore is that while there was one voice throughout this film, there was not a voice representing the women on the ship. It talked about our mothers and our sisters being raped and being abused, yet they didn't have a voice for 77 minutes about what it is that they endured and what they experienced. And we have risen to have the likes of a Maxine Waters and Condoleezza Rice and gifted young women such as yourself. What do you think will be the voice of young women in leadership in this new millennium?
The new voice is going to be so powerful. And what I do as an actress, especially with this film, and especially the point that you just brought up, as a rape survivor and as an actress, and at that point in my career where people are starting to listen to me, you realize I have a voice. I can make a difference. So instead of getting up on MTV Cribs talking about this is my Benz and look at my ring my husband got me and look at our nice stuff, I'm talking about I too have been there. I too was raped. I too didn't have a voice. I too was mute. I didn't get to say anything about what was happening to me. And now I have reclaimed my voice. And now I speak about rape survivors, tell you where to get counseling, tell you where the resources are that can help you. And I believe that I'm just one of many voices that are just waiting to be heard. But it's a matter of using that voice. And the important thing about this film is that it reminds us of the common link that we have as Black people. And the more that we try to separate ourselves along socioeconomic lines and distance ourselves from the struggle, the more we lose focus and the more we decrease the value and the power of our voice. So what I say, to other young women, what I say to other entertainers is don't misuse your voice and don't take your voice for granted because people are listening.
I want to direct this to Terrence Howard. Throughout your career, you have played roles that were not atypical for young Black men. You weren't a gangster, a thug, a pimp, but had different characteristics to show that we're not a myopic people, but have many different perspectives. How do you think that we can help break the stereotypes that a lot of us try to live up to? Because even as we've had this tour going on college campuses, it's hard to define the difference between the scholars and those who are perpetrating something they saw on BET. So how then do we break the stereotype for thinking rational young Black men?
I guess the first thing that you do is you refuse to be limited by these stereotypes. You refuse to wear the clothes that they project that we're supposed to wear. Or you refuse to look and talk the way they want you to talk. And no matter what someone tries to make you do, like Robert Townsend said a long time ago in Hollywood Shuffle, there's always work at the post office. And if you have that integrity of self, when I was a little boy, my father put some salt and some pepper on the table. And he said, that's salt and that's pepper. And then he combined the two together. He said, now, can you call that pepper or can you likely call that salt? He said, that's a mixture. And he said, the moment that you were brought here, you were mixed with a lot of stuff. And you have to represent each and every one of those encounters that's taken place with you. And if you don't have faith in who you are and what you have to accomplish and what you have to contribute, then you're worth nothing. And if you're worth nothing in front of me, I will treat you like nothing in front of me. And you will not be in my way. And that's how I deal with producers or directors that try and limit me to a particular thing, a particular part. I didn't grow up like everybody else. And none of you guys grew up like everybody else. We all have our own unique perspective on life. And I always remember about myself, and I may be going far off the point, but you asked me a question about how I think about something. Where my mind sees things, I look at that I'm made up of 90% water, which is made up of hydrogen and oxygen. Well, the largest source of hydrogen in our solar system is inside the sun. So the very elements that make up me once rested in the very center of the sun. And if I can thrive under those type of extreme pressures, then I can definitely thrive under some little pressure that's placed on me by someone's limited views.
I want to direct this last question to Amir. One of the driving synthesis of this film was the music. That the music helped guide our emotions. And long since, music has been an intricate part of our community, of our society. Do you feel with this resurgence of neo soul that it will guide us back to music with a message.
Neo soul. Okay. I think the as far as black people are concerned and music and the whole African music experience, you got to sort of divide it into two categories, so to speak. And just in my personal observation, I either see music being done as a form of art expression or as commerce, you know. And when I say art, I'm talking about people who genuinely have a God-given gift and they sort of develop it to their heart's desire, you know. Whereas a person like John Coltrane can spend the last 5 years of his life doing spiritual music and not even have to deal with the bop work that he did earlier with the Miles Davis Quintet, or an artist like Stevie Wonder, whose, you know, mid-70s work definitely reflected his heart and his feelings. And then on the other side of the spectrum, of course, commerce. Now, you have to understand, like, this is a business, you know, and no matter what anyone says, you know, people can look at the Roots or at Common or whatever, like, oh, you know, I encounter this all the time, like, oh, I love you guys because you guys are, you know, more on this level and, you know, not like these guys I see on BT or whatever, you know, like the whole art versus commerce thing. And the thing is, you have to understand that it's all a business. And, you know, I've encountered people under the guise of art that use that art as a gimmick to sell their product, to make commerce, you know, as opposed to the so-called commerce rappers. You know, I just worked with Jay-Z, and back when I was first entertaining the idea of doing so, you know, a lot of the so-called naysayers and people on my website or whatever, like, oh, I knew, oh, so what did Jay-Z do when you laughed at him and said you wouldn't do it? And I was like, I didn't laugh at him, and I didn't tell him I wouldn't do it. I did it, you know. And he turned out to be one of the most down-to-earth people that I've worked with, even though aesthetically, you know, his point of view is somewhat different than what you expect a person like myself to be working with. But my overall point is, in music, there's a particular scene in this film where, you know, the narrator of the film is talking about dancing for the captain of the ship's enjoyment. And that's still happening today. Like, that's never stopped, you know. Whether or not it's a so-called spiritual return to music, or whether it's you're doing it just to have bragging rights. I mean, black people are very proud people, and, you know, we're going to brag about things that we have achieved, you know, wear our achievements on our chest, so to speak. So, I mean, that's still going on today. Now, whether or not neo soul is supposed to be the safe umbrella for a so-called artist to hide under, you know, that's all good, but I still see it as, you know, once you complete a work of art and you turn those master tapes to the record company, it's still under the guise of capitalism and business. So, you know, even though it's done under the right intentions, it's still for the same evil system. So you really need to talk about owning a business and owning a distribution company and controlling your music that way. But that's a whole nother, I could go on. That could be a 4-hour conversation right there, so.
Let's give all of our panelists a big hand. While you're doing so, let's thank HBO again for sharing this with us and bringing all of our guests to come in and be a part. We're going to, at this juncture, open up the floor so that you might be able to share whatever your concerns are.
You gotta remember, they had been trapped for months on at the shore. Their spirit had been broken to such an extreme point, and then put on this ship for 6 months. You got the closest, Einstein said everything's relative. So let's take it to a relative place. Here we are in the United States. Now, how many black slaves are inside the prison? And how often do you see them walk in line down the railway because they're scared to death? Because if somebody steps out of line, they become a problem and they are harmed. And it's the few that really want to, like me, you can't chain me. I don't give a damn who you are. Because I don't really care about me. I care about my strength and my pride. And I've been fired a number of times. I've been arrested a number of times. And mostly just for standing up for my rights. But if every one of us did that, we would be in a whole lot of trouble. So somewhere, somebody has to have the common sense to walk and plan for the future. And as a result of that planning, here we are, able to maneuver ourselves against all that. So the passivity, it had to have happened, or they would have been murdered on those ships.
Oh, don't wait for films to be made. You can read, and you walk across the street here at Boxton, or you go to New York to Schaumburg. There are hundreds and hundreds of accounts of our ancestors rebelling in Philadelphia, New York, all over the Western Hemisphere where our ancestors were enslaved. Read, okay? You don't have to wait for a film.
I like Shelby. Did they base this on slave narratives, or did they make it up themselves?
Patrick Chamoiseau is a very famous intellectual, particularly in his home country and in France. And so they did a lot of research. And in fact, at least from the research that they did and the subsequent material that I reviewed, there weren't that many slave revolts on the boats. There were certainly once we were brought here that changed somewhat, but the actual number of slaves on ships who were able to revolt, who had the means, who were unchained long enough, just weren't that many. And
that's not so.
Okay.
I hate to beg to differ with you. Not being disrespectful, but yes, there were many forms of revolt. As mentioned in the films, there were uprisings. There was different ways of finding ways to overtake vessels. We may know of the one Amistad, but throughout the passage, can you imagine thousands of ships bringing our ancestors from Africa, and there was not but one revolt. There are accounts and records of many revolts. And just something, unfortunately, that they're saying that only half made it here, and as a result of the disease, the suicide, and the revolts accounted for that only half.
And I just want to add that those revolts continued in the Americas. And the very idea of a United States, the very idea of a Brazil, the very idea of a Cuba comes from those African revolts and those African republics. Because in the American colonies we had maroon societies, in the Spanish colonies they were called palenques, in Brazil they were called quilombos, but all of those were before there were non-indigenous states. So you end up with the idea of a state in the Americas not attached to a European state comes from us. The very idea of a Cuba is our idea. The very idea of a Brazil is our idea. We have to claim that legacy. The idea is we have a freedom of both Native American and African.
All right, we got another question over here.
Today it said that, like, everyone here in our generation, like, we really have nothing to fight for. But to me, it seems like it's really a lack of leadership. So if every one of us wanted to get up today and say, okay, I'm going to be the leader, I'm going to be the one to get out into my community and help, who do we actually look for to help us develop and nurture that desire, especially women?
I say, why wait? Look to yourself. You know what I mean? That's part of the problem. We've been waiting for the next Malcolm X, for the next MLK. You be the next Malcolm X. You talk about nationalism. You talk about reparations.
I thought it was Master P.
You know, we can be our own leaders. We can follow the beat of our own drum, and we have to stop waiting. We've waited long enough.
Well, a little Bow Wow. He's not gonna do this.
I think they brought up something interesting also. The one thing that we just saw, to me, was a polarity of opinions or facts or information, whatever. And the one thing, especially in America, I mean, if you go back to Egyptology, and I touched on it a little bit when I said the three-headed monster being religion, politics, and economics, you also have to remember, he who has the power to define sets the tone. And unfortunately, we have many different accounts that will never ever be heard because the way history is recorded and documented has a slant on it that has a purpose and an intent, which takes us back to the same pinnacle that I was talking about with capitalism. It is not in the capitalist interest for you to really, really know the truth of the history, whether it's ugly or pretty. So we're always going to have these kind of situations that you have to be much more assertive in our investigation process.
I just wanted to say that I thought the film was very good, and if it didn't have a lot of positive things, we wouldn't be able to point out the negatives, so I just wanted to give accolades to witness that for that. But I did have one problem. The thing that I find problematic about films and media is people tend to look at that as normalcy, and when you leave out certain people, women, like were there women slaves, like we just kind of focus on men being thrown away and just a lot of men, like so it kind of gives you the image that maybe there weren't that many women that were captives, and then like were the children also thrown off the boat and they died, or like how did they really relate? And I know it's not much you can include in a film because like, okay, it was called The Middle Passage, so we're gonna talk about The Middle Passage, but I just felt that it kind of left out like the female gender and also something from the kids, but I thought it was good still. Thank you.
Point of fact, most of the ancestors were women because they brought our women here to breed them like animals. And so instead of the transportation of our ancestors, they would bring the women here, the strong and the young, and they would breed them. And as many as having 30 to 35 women, children during their lifetime. So many of the ancestors who brought here were women.
I just want to say one thing to the women in the audience. As there's not that many black women producers in Hollywood. There are not that many black women directors yet. And I got my start because of this man at the end of this row who gave me my first producing job when I started my own company. Thank you, Spike. He's being shy. But let me just say, I encourage, because most of the filmmakers, as in any culture, tend to be men, I encourage any young woman here, if that's what your inclination is, I agree with Gabrielle 100%. Go ahead and do it. Get started. Don't wait for someone to validate you. Don't wait. If that's the voice you have, then go ahead and create.
And my brother here from Quest, from Roots, he made an interesting point when he said it's all business. Of course, you can see my axe to grind is with capitalism. When it comes down to business, everything is about commercializing and being able to set up to have an audience where you can make some type of money. So, of course, HBO doesn't have the same dynamics as network television, but it's still about subscribership and so on and so forth. But I was getting back to saying again, when I gave you the 4 things, racism, sexism, classism, and ageism, unfortunately, we have a situation where the backlash of all of those isms creates an emotional, we have mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional, I can go on and on, but the backlash of the emotion of that is, on some levels, and I've heard Hollywood producers talk about this when they talk about the realism in films, we have a very, very emotional, sensitive hotspot, if you will, when it comes to seeing women and children taken advantage of in film. So a lot of times they stay away from certain levels of truth because they're trying to be emotionally correct, and it does a lot of disservice in a lot of cases because, like you said, you feel left out. And I think, again, part of that is backlash, but a lot of it is by design, again, because, again, in a sexist society, men see themselves and they see the world from their point of view, and when you go into the racist side, white America, which is what it's really about, white male supremacy, it's really about their viewpoint and about how comfortable they are with what level of truth they'll allow you to see.
This is more of a comment than a question. I think the first thing I like to say is that
We need to recognize that the folks on that boat were not slaves, but rather Africans who were enslaved. And that as long as the majority of Africans in this country continue to believe that slaves were brought from Africa, we'll continue to act like slaves in America. The other point is, and no disrespect, Mr. Lee, but I'd like to know if the B in HBO stands for bamboozle. Because as I watched this film that talked about the Middle Passage, from all accounts that I've ever read or heard about the Middle Passage, it was horrific. There was nothing in this movie, personally, that I felt was horrific. If this had been a horrific viewing or depiction of the Ma'afa, there would still not be a dry eye in this room.
What's your point?
Well, again, my point is that this, what was the point? That's my point. What was the point? I mean, if this was about the Middle Passage, then what I saw was some folk bring some other folk on a boat and they died. It was a long trip, some of them died along the way. That's the cost of doing business. End of story. So what was the point?
You know that it's fighting the director's film, correct?
Why'd you do that? You should, email him.
All right, we got another question up here.
Okay, first of all, I'd like to say that I did enjoy the video. However, I think that the movie didn't do justice to the sheer number of people who were lost in the Middle Passage. Just by the numbers that Professor Norman gave earlier, it had to be over 65 million African people lost just on the way to America. And white people have a tendency to look at us and say, why are you punishing us for the things our forefathers did? But you don't understand that we lost our forefathers in this trip. 65 million generations were lost in this trip, and I think that's something that was not recognized by this film, and I would just like for people to take notice of that.
But let's be honest. How are you going to represent one slave ship to be the loss of 65 million people? I had my problems with this film, but let's be honest. How is one film, I don't care who you are, how is one film going to truly represent the horror of us being enslaved? That's too enormous burden to put on one filmmaker, one film. It's not really possible.
If you really wanted to depict the horror of the Middle Passage, the rape scenes alone would never ever get past the censors. Like, I'm very shocked that they even let the violence scene just for 1/8 of a second in there, but you're talking about slightly rolling to your left side in someone's feces, and not to mention getting pissed on, and just to really truly depict the horrors of sharks attacking you. Like, I don't think Hollywood would even dream. And if you did go the independent route, the effects alone would be so high up in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
If there was some, if there was some filmmaker brave enough to really show slavery, they would be hung. If you had the filmmaker up here that had a young black girl or boy being raped, you people would be up on the stage in a second. I don't care if the filmmaker was black or white. I would not show that. I would not show an 8-year-old girl being raped by these sailors on a ship.
Why not?
For me? Because I think there's a way you can do what to show an actual depiction of that.
Well, first of all, that would violate.
You couldn't work for Kmart if you did.
I couldn't what?
You couldn't work for Kmart if you did.
Sir, my commercials have nothing to do with my feature film. So look, this is a personal thing. I have a 7-year-old daughter, and as a father, As a, let me finish.
You didn't allow me to finish. You didn't allow me to finish. Why should I give you respect if you couldn't afford me?
Go ahead, finish.
Take the mic out of your hand.
Can't we all just get along? Listen, please.
As a filmmaker.
At least for Black History Month, let's get along and respect one another.
As a filmmaker. I could not shoot that scene. Maybe somebody else could. I could not. That's not me. You have to show. You're not trying to make a Walt Disney film, but I could not shoot a scene like that.
And you all have to understand what goes into filmmaking. Think about any one of your children, your little brothers or sisters, and not only, where they're women being raped, children, but imagine a little boy, your little boy, naked, with some greasy white man hovering over him, and to show the real depiction of what it is to be raped. You would, I cannot imagine any one of you wanting your child, your little brother, your little sister, your mom, your dad, it wouldn't happen.
We have another question on this side.
You work in the film industry, it seems like you have more of a view onto the society and the popular culture, and how do you think it's been swallowed up by, commercialism or,
I think, again, just listening to the audience just now and how people were saying, well, it's the truth and why won't you show it? What I find interesting is there was a scene in this movie where the guys, the white guys were praying at this point. And we talk about wanting to see truth and how, why wouldn't you show the girl getting raped and all of these, we have emotional reactions to all of these things. But I think certain levels of truth make too many of us uncomfortable in masses, which again makes it unproductive in a capitalist situation. So when you take it to the next level, my question was, why are we uncomfortable when you bring it to the next level and say, let's start from the higher as opposed to the lower? What about the God concept? The fact that nobody talked about what these guys' religion was, what their culture was, yet still, when you bring up Christianity versus Islam versus Judaism, everybody gets quiet. But that's also another level of truth that needs to be confronted. Because we've been socialized a certain way from our God concept all the way down, from the viewing of Christ as white by the people that have actually killed us and enslaved us, and everything we learned from our religious background, because we're not that investigated, we're not that thorough, we don't cross-reference any of our religious doctrine with anybody else's doctrine, and we don't cross-reference it with anything historical. Yet still we have emotional attachments to it, and we don't have real conversations about it. So when you say, why would you show somebody 8-year-old getting raped, it's almost like, how are you going to even go there? You can't even deal with the spiritual concept, which is an intangible thing.
And I also thought the depiction of Africans and their contribution into the slave system was excellent. And my question is that you stated that the Africans and their contribution to the slave system shouldn't have been in the film, but I personally believe that capturing slaves was very seldomly done. It was mostly the selling of slaves from Africans to the whites for liquor, beads, and guns. Like, we were traded for gunpowder. That's what was done to us. So I believe that it showed the truth. It basically showed the truth that a lot of us don't know and think it's, all the white people. It wasn't, because without the Africans, we wouldn't be here.
Well, I'd like to respond to that. As a criminal defense lawyer, I represent a lot of young drug dealers. But those young drug dealers from North Philly have no impact whatsoever on the drug trade in America. So to equate the Africans who were involved in the slave trade is to equate my Raymond Rosen Project drug dealing client with Oliver North. It's a completely different thing. The other thing I want to explain is that Africans didn't capture Africans and take them to Europe. The Europeans came to Africa. It's a matter of looking at the cause and the symptom, the cause and the effect. What was the cause of slavery? It was the devils coming to Africa doing what they did. The other thing folks don't realize is that the same Congolese king who was involved, Agacha, who was involved in the slave trade, was himself enslaved. And those Africans who decided to rebel against the slave trade, they were enslaved. So Africans would have been enslaved by Europeans despite what Africans did. The fact that you focus on some minor player in the slave trade is to do disservice to what the Europeans did. I'm not going to let them off the hook by saying that blacks were involved in the slave trade. That's utter nonsense. Ask yourself, would there have been African slavery by Europeans without African complicity? The answer is absolutely yes. The Europeans would have done what they did despite what took place. If those Europeans had not come there to do it, we wouldn't have had slavery. Simple as that. And the one final point I want to make, which is critical, even to the extent that these African kings were involved in the slave trade, it wasn't the slave trade as they knew it. They didn't know that you lost your language, your culture, your religion, your humanity. They thought it was the same thing that happened anytime you have a prisoner of war. So the fact that we even discussing this, I appreciate that, but also I'm bothered by it because we're getting sidetracked. We're getting our eye off the ball. The ball is the devil who started slavery and must pay for it by blood or money.
Listen, we're running quickly out of time. We're running out of time. Let me ask you to limit your questions and your comments, and as the panelists to limit theirs as well. Our gentleman is going to ask his, and then we're going to go to our elder so that he can speak for us.
My name is Michael Chair. I'm a graduate of Temple University. This is Fox School, Business School. And my question is, we're all seeing the news, the friend, and the question is, the acts committed in this film was cowardly by white folks. And now, how can we, as black people, avoid being cowardly?
He said the acts were cowardly. How can we now avoid being cowardly?
No. What we're supposed to do.
So he's saying that should it be an eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth situation?
No.
By some religious doctrine.
No, what we're supposed to do, it's like we're spending so much time talking about what happened back then, and it's important to have an understanding about that. But what, like I asked before, what are each and every one of you doing on a daily basis to stand up for your rights? You know, how do you stand for your own integrity and your principles? How are you planning for your own future? We can all sit and complain, but I want to know who's actually doing something about it.
And we have to understand it's a multi-layered situation. Again, we have to be comfortable with being able to agree to disagree. Because if what I love about what we're doing is, again, you see the vast differences of opinions. We have to be able to start communicating. That's the very first place. Without the communication, we're not going to get anywhere. So at the end of the day, we have to be able to open up the floor to the most uncomfortable. Somebody does want to see the 8-year-old getting raped. I personally don't want to, but that's my emotional choice. But I respect your choice if you think that that's necessary to convey something that happened. But again, history is documented according to he who has the power to define. And at the end of the day, if he shoots the 8-year-old getting raped and the powers that be don't want it in the film, it's not in the film, period. So you also have to understand the dynamics of where we are. We are in America. We, until recently, if not ever, are still considered 3/5 of a man. We got to start going into how we're actually viewed. We don't really count until we matter economically. And then even in that situation, we're still small potatoes because the economic structure isn't designed to be overthrown. So we have to understand the nature of what the battle is going to be. Then we have to understand, again, everybody isn't a leader. Everybody isn't necessarily a follower. Somebody's a mathematician. Somebody's a philosopher. Somebody's a scientist. We need to pool the resources and understand the multi-layered problem and get together on a communication level first.
It's the Wild Wild West. Please direct your attention this way. Our elder wants to speak, 81 years of age. And I think all of us ought to, in fact, listen. 84 years of age. You said, oh, wow, people, here's 3 years. 84 years of age, and I think that this is a good central point in moment for all of us.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm glad to be here. I enjoyed the picture, but it wasn't graphic enough for me. That's right. I thought there would be more scenery of the slaves and what was being done to them. I just heard just a few scenes, and it was mostly talking, which was good. And you know, I feel that many of us, when we talk about our situation, we have a tendency to soft pedal it and not and sugarcoat it, and don't tell the whole story as it is. And I feel we should do that. Indeed, the time has come for us to tell it the way it is. Don't worry about offending a white man. Don't worry about it. Tell the truth. You talk about if somebody make a film showing that 8-year-old girl being raped, that's a lot they would be lynched. Listen, what about some time ago, a girl, I think she was 11 years old. She was raped in the bedroom stated. And a Negro judge, who I detest, they call him the Honorable Judge Reynolds, but to me, he is the dishonorable Judge Reynolds. He held those boys with kid gloves. He didn't do nothing to them.
That's right.
And when the Negroes talk about it on the radio and so forth, they soft pedal it. They don't talk the way it is. These people, you talk about slavery, but slavery is still going on. We're still putting on a good strategy. Now, look what they did to a man down in Texas, I think it was. Drug him behind a truck and said, hey, get off. It is time for us to stop soft pedaling the thing and show it and tell it the way it is. Yes, we should make films and show what has been done to us. Show it to us in ways.
Let's give a big hand for our elder. You are a voice of wisdom and reason. All right, we have a comment over here, but real quick, my man wanted to make an announcement for people that want to do something.
On Friday, March 1st.
That didn't happen in Africa. Were there wars? Were there tribal conflicts? Were people captured? They certainly were. But when they were captured, they were still human. They weren't taken to a foreign country and dehumanized by constitutional law. I'm sorry.
Let's give all of our panelists and even give yourselves a hand. Come on, we can do better than that, please.
I'm doing pretty good, man. I've been trying to get with Motive for the last year, man.
Last year?
For the last year. About, trying to do some advertising in the publication.
Oh, we ain't got no money.
It's not bad. I got $75, man, for a business card.
Yo, money.
Come on, man. Come on, Amir.
Keyword is internship.
Come on, Amir.
Oh, it's no joke.
For promotions?
Seriously?
I see promotions in other magazines, though. I see Jag stuff in other publications.
Oh, that's MCA.
But doesn't it have to go through, like, Kenny?
Oh, stop playing. Hell no.
They don't have no say-so in terms of who they...
Yo, Jazzy's record sold with like 2,000.
What about
Ice record sold 1,000. You know what I mean?
Like promoted though.
Yeah. Oh, that's any advertisement you see of our so-called artists. Oh, that shit is straight up. That's MCA doing that.
All of it.
Yeah. This is what they said.
624-2008.
Thank you. Because I'm a
fax number.
Oh, can you?
718-624.